difference between like having your own garden and growing food and permaculture? Is there no difference?
There's a difference, yeah. It doesn't have to be a difference, but there is. So, that sounds like a good place to start. The gardening is growing your own food, and permaculture has a couple more stipulations to it. Perhaps, well, let's see. There's many different ways of gardening. And some people will say they practice biodynamic gardening, permaculture. There's a French intensive method, which they did in the 1800s using what they had in Paris, which was very available, was horse manure. And so the entire form of gardening was based on using manure and actually glass jars and creating microhabitats. And so you can have all sorts of methods. When you go to native peoples, they have a very spiritual relationship with their growing food. Biodynamics, which started with Rudolf Steiner, you might be familiar with the Waldorf schools some kids go to, that has a spiritual component, especially related to what the planets are doing and the stars are doing. And a lot of it actually is really fascinating, and then some of it to me is difficult to explain, or even maybe difficult to see some of the results. And yet, even in the realm of comparing organic to traditional gardening right now, biodynamic gardens seem to be the most productive, are coming. So something's very right, and it may be just the attention of the grower to what they're doing, or it might be a greater awareness of seasonal cycles. But we're using a focus of permaculture here. And Andrew, if you want to share, you definitely chime in. But permaculture was, the name was initiated by some folks in Australia in the 1970s, and it's either an abbreviation for permanent culture or permanent agriculture.
I might add a little background to that.
If you'd like to.
Bill Mollison, Australia, was studying forests. 60s, and he discovered the abundancy, the fecundity, just the life energy that was inherent in that system, forest ecology, and so he took the knowledge that he was gaining there and applied it to growing food, to sustaining human communities, humans, and permaculture was born. So, forest ecology, food forests, permacultural systems, they're all linked together.
So what's interesting is that they named it, but it was actually a practice of relationship with food that some people will say they've been practicing all along, especially native folks or very attentive gardener types. And so you can look at something and say, oh, that's permaculture, and somebody else might say, but I practice something else. So it gets difficult where we start naming things.
Recognize the soil as an entity, and you don't cut it up and till it every year. You let it continue to grow, the microorganisms in there to grow and develop, because they serve the plant life too. I like that, and I like also trying to find more perennial foods to grow, and adapting our diets to that, because it's less work than growing new seedlings every year and planting them and harvesting them and then composting them, although we'll probably still always do a lot of that. But I like perennial food.
So in perennial, if you go back through time, that would have been the primary food source of hunter-gatherers, would have been finding food that's growing out in nature. And then, the agricultural revolution, which might be considered a turning point in human evolution, was when we discovered we could save seeds and grow them again the next year. So if you look at the Paleolithic diet, depends how far back you want to go, but permaculture can nurture a diet that's much more back to what we've evolved from. And so what we're doing here, and at some of the other places that we have perma-blitzes, is that we're trying to, one, convert lawn into growing space, because great food shortages are results of just not nurturing the soils. The other thing with the garden is that it's looking at this year and next year and years in the future. So it's not just, I'm going to plant corn this year and then next year is a blank slate. It's how do we look at it through time, and in relationship to the house and the traffic patterns here in the house, that like gardens that are farther away, you may not take care of as easily as if it's near the front door. And so some vegetables and some items don't need to be taken care of as much. Or even like your fruit trees, you might be able to have them further from the house, or you might want them closer because the deer like to eat them. So there's a give and take of what your specific spot is. There's many different reasons to have raised beds or to not have raised beds even, but they're beautiful. They create structure, so it makes it easier to weed, something more inviting to go work with. And there's just a distinction between garden space and path. Because paths are really important, I would say, in your garden. Because soil compression is a big issue. So if you think about tractors going up and down fields many times a season, they're destroying the soil. Everything is compressing the soil, and the soil is a living entity. So if you think about it, you're standing on it, and the soil's trying to breathe. And here you are stepping on it or driving on it with something that's very, very heavy. So we're trying to create a path where we won't compress the soil. And then it's amazingly productive, and the food is amazingly healthy when it's nurtured in the right way with nutrients and such.
And a lot more nutrient dense than something that's not grown in those ways.
Yeah.
We've done our fair share of gardening.
And you feel the relationship of that with fossil fuel dependency?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How so?
Because, first of all, the equipment that's being used, like tractors, they use fossil fuels, and also to the transportation. All the food in supermarkets is transported by a vehicle running on fossil fuels.
With polyculture farming, you're not relying on one crop, so you're not having to use like synthetic fertilizers full of oil, I guess, just to make that be able to happen year after year after year. So the importance of eating your own food and eating locally.
Yeah, so true.